Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake here doing a solo kind of recap review podcast of Miami's impressive 28-22 win over Florida State. Has some thoughts, observations coming off that dominant performance after rewatching the game. So we'll dive into that here in a little bit. Before we start, of course, want to highlight two of our sponsors, Canes Connection. With it being the bye week, I wanted to hammer home the point of the importance to go support these guys. Miami has the best team in the country for a reason. Canes Connection helps in a significant way in the talent acquisition space. I think, this season, last season also shows when you give Mario Cristobal and this staff a war chest of resources to work with in the talent acquisition space. They will deliver a big time roster and a fun product to watch. So go to canesconnection.com to be a new member. New members get entered into a raffle pool to win a signed football by defensive end Ruben Bain. But don't sign up for that reason. Sign up because you are having fun this season. Sign up because you like seeing the Miami Hurricanes dominate college football. Sign up because you want to see this thing turn into a dynasty. In college football and talent acquisition, you always have to reinvest. The price is always going up. So go support the program in that way this week, canesconnection.com. Also want to highlight our guy at Musarino Law, Nick Musarino. If you've been injured in any type of accident, whether that's slip and fall, boating, trucking, Uber, Lyft, any type of car accident, Nick Musarino is the personal injury attorney you should contact at 561-960-9870 or visit his website at flinjury.law. All right, so let's dive into this game. And let's start with the Miami offense. Let me just go through my notes after the rewatch here. Look, I think as always, it starts with the difference at the line of scrimmage when we talk about this team in general. And we're starting here with the offense. So let's talk about the offensive line. Miami's offensive line versus Florida State's defensive line was not a close matchup. And we kind of hinted that this would be the case going into the game, right? Miami against Florida State allowed only 4 pressures from FSU defensive linemen. Inez Cooper was the only offensive lineman to allow a pressure of the starting offensive line. He allowed 2. Frankly, Inez Cooper does have some things to clean up in his game coming off that Florida State performance, couple penalties, and just in general being on the same page with assignments with the offensive line. He wasn't straight up beat. It was more, blocking the wrong guy and allowing a pressure that way. We told you going into this game too, right? We heard about from the FSU side of things that, FSU's front whipped Alabama's offensive line in their week 1 win. And that was true. But we kind of made it clear, like, look, you watch Bama's offensive line, you watch Miami's offensive line. It's not really close which one of those offensive lines is better. And it showed up in that game. Miami's, when Carson Beck was kept clean in the pocket, which I believe he was kept clean on 80% of his dropbacks. So an elite rate of clean passing opportunities for Carson. He was playing 7-on-7 against Florida State for much of the night. When he was kept clean, he went 20 of 24 for 241 yards and 4 touchdowns. So the success of this team is built at the line of scrimmage. On the offensive side, it starts with the offensive line. FSU devoted numbers to stop the run. So the run game was a bit muddy and a bit of a slog. Miami was patient with it, just didn't pop anything big. But the pass protection was excellent, and Miami dominated in the pass game, which we'll get into now. Again, it seemed like, well, Shannon Dawson kind of said this in the recap press conference held on Monday with the coordinators. I would recommend go watching that. They were pretty insightful on the game in general during that session. But Shannon Dawson said, look, going into our game against Florida State, all Florida State kept talking about was we have to stop the run, stop the run, stop the run. And he said, so we kind of figured that they would sell out to stop the run. And so they were ready with a lot of play action looks. And Miami hammered Florida State with the play action passing game. On play action looks, Carson Beck was 13 of 14 for 146 yards and 3 touchdowns. Players like for Florida State, Earl Little on the rewatch. You watch the game again. Earl Little is biting so hard on the play action looks, and it's just too easy with the Miami receivers getting behind him for those deep shots. The first deep shot of the game was interesting. It was a deep shot from under center, so kind of like an old school play action pass deep shot. It was on 2nd and 8. Uh, it was a dime to Malachi Tony, who, ball just went through his fingertips. I don't know if it was a drop. I mean, I would technically grade that as a drop, but maybe that's harsh. Um, but it was a dime by Carson Beck. And then they kept going to that. The ball flight on the flea flicker. The flea flicker to me is a type of play action. Um, the ball flight from Carson on that pass was beautiful. That was NFL level stuff. So that's one thing they did. FSU said we're going to load the box and we are going to force you to beat us downfield on the outside. Miami said, cool, we're going to play action you, make you come up and hit those easy ones over the top of you, which they did all day whenever they wanted. They also did a nice job, Miami did, of spitting the ball out in the quick game. So again, the box was heavy numbers. Miami used the quick game to, essentially, it was a pass. It's a passing play, but it's really just an extension of the run game. And on passes behind the line of scrimmage, Carson Beck was 12 of 12 for 78 yards and 1 touchdown. So essentially, Miami ran for 97 yards, but I would look at it as like, okay, take 78 of the passing yards almost and put it to, uh, you know, add it to that rushing total in some ways. On passes 0 to 9 yards past the line of scrimmage. So the short passing game, Beck was 6 of 8 for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. One of the talking points coming into this game was, just in general, who would be the more explosive team, right? Coming into the game, Miami was more of a methodical team, and that was true. But Miami's offense was facing an FSU defense that, frankly, didn't look very good the week before against Virginia. And then FSU, of course, entered the game as one of the most explosive offenses in the country. Well, on Saturday night, Miami was by far the most explosive team. Miami had 7 explosive plays on the day, and 3 of them really mattered. 3 of them went for touchdowns. Florida State didn't score any explosive touchdowns on the day. Miami scored 3 touchdowns from outside the red zone. Last year, Miami had the #1 offense in the country. They did it 3 times. They did that, score 3 touchdowns from outside the red zone 3 times last year against Power 4 opponents. They did it against Louisville. They did it against Duke. They did it against Iowa State. In last year's match, so of course, last year's Florida State team went 2-10, weren't very good. Miami's offense last year did not score once outside the red zone against that FSU team last year. And in addition to that, right, how special is Malachi Tony? No player has generated 2 touchdowns that went for at least 40 yards, or I guess 4 players did it since 1996. I think the last one was David Njoku against Duke, scored from at least 40 yards out as a receiver twice in one game. First time against Florida State that it happened since 1996. And really, it should have been 3 because that play Malachi Tony scored on that was called back. Yes, it was a penalty, but that penalty did not impact the play. So really just a special night, special player, Malachi Tony. Quick hitter thoughts on the offensive side. I again, I feel like Dawson called an excellent game. Shannon Dawson, he knew exactly what Florida State was going to do coming into the game, what their approach was going to be. He managed the game well. They were highly explosive with how they scored touchdowns, And then they balanced that out too with 0 turnovers, which of course matters in road games. Turnover momentum is a real thing when you're on the road. And that was just as big as hitting those explosive touchdowns. Some other quick thoughts, the tight ends, they got going some. I thought Alex Bauman did a nice job coming down with a contested catch in the red zone and a pass that was somewhat dangerous, but he made the catch. And he converted a key third down, I believe, on Miami's first drive coming out of the second half, a 3rd and 2. Um, Nice play there by him. He was also good um, on the first touchdown drive. Miami went for it on 4th and 1. Alex Bauman motioned over to the right side and blocked it up uh, next to Francis Maui Noah with Mark Fletcher carrying the ball. They put a dent on that side. And look, I think I've criticized Bauman in general. He hasn't been a very good blocker this year, in my opinion, but on that play, he knocked back number 90 at the line of scrimmage pretty significantly and allowed uh, Mark Fletcher to pick up that first down on 4th down, which led to Miami's first touchdown, which kind of, you know, was a signal that this was going to be a relatively smooth game for the Hurricanes from that point on. Um, there's a lot of talk coming into the game. Would Doak Campbell, would that crazy environment rattle Carson Beck at all? Because a lot of people looked at his road splits last year and thought you could apply that to Florida State. Did not. Carson Beck had all day to throw. That's why he was not rattled at all. There was a lot of talk too about Carson Beck having some elbow issues and arm strength declining. That didn't show up either. Uh, in fact, Thomas Castellanos looked like the quarterback with the arm issues in terms of just balls dying, deep balls dying in the middle of the air. Um, it was a tough day for Jerry Wilson, the FSU corner. Coming into the game, I had heard that Miami felt like they could pick on him, and it certainly played out that way. They picked on him with the deep post to CJ Daniels, which was another beautiful deep shot throw by Carson Beck. CJ Daniels got him turned pretty easily on the post, and it was an easy play relative to it being a deep ball. Also, CJ Daniels roasted Jerry Wilson on the quick slant for a touchdown. And then on the play that got called back, it was kind of a demoralizing play, though, by Malachi Toney, the touchdown that got called back. He absolutely broke Jerry Wilson's ankles with the first move to kind of get going down the sideline. And overall on the day, Jerry Wilson was targeted 7 times. He allowed 4 receptions for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also missed a tackle on the day. Another thing that stands out, look, the run game didn't get going much. FSU did take that away. But man, Marty Brown is a handful to tackle. You feel like he's always testing the fortitude of the tackler, the person who's trying to tackle him. He's trying to run through that guy, and it feels like he's always picking up 3 yards after contact. And he's just a handful and not fun to play against, I would imagine. So overall, great day by the offense in terms of game plan, what they wanted to do, what they expected FSU to do. They were ready for it, and execution at a high level in that game. Miami's defense, look, this was the story of the game because FSU's offense was putting up impressive numbers coming into the game, highly explosive, but they had not played a defense close to the caliber of Miami's. And so it was going to be an interesting chess match of, okay, which one of those groups would end up winning the day relative to who those units were for the season coming into that game. Miami's defense clearly won that matchup, and it started with taking away the explosive. FSU averaged coming into the game against Alabama and Virginia, so they're two Power Four opponents. FSU averaged 7.5 plays of at least 20 yards. Against Miami on Saturday, they only had 2. Their biggest play when the game was in the balance was a 28-yard pass to running back Usman Kroma on the first drive. It was kind of like a wheel route. They got the linebackers confused in coverage, hit Miami on a 28-yard play. On that drive, so they got their explosive play on that drive, but FSU had to settle for a field goal. And really, I said this after the game, but in hindsight, that was an indication of how this game was going to go. FSU got their explosive on that drive, still had to settle for a field goal. And from the rest of the game, Miami really did frustrate Florida State, taking them out of their comfort zone. Miami took away the two biggest ways FSU generates explosives: downfield passing and side to side motions, jet sweeps, uh, edge runs, end arounds, reverses. And Miami definitely did a good job of taking those away. FSU totaled 3 yards on two end around attempts. They tried a jet sweep once, got negative yards from it. They ran to the edges 7 times and totaled 26 yards on those runs. Tommy Castellanos was 0 for 4 on deep shots with 2 picks. Miami essentially said, we're going to play off. We're going to stop your run. We're going to play off coverages, and we're going to make Tommy Castellanos, methodically beat us. And he's just not that guy. He's not the quarterback that has that skill set. And so Miami's corners were playing off. They gave up some easy stuff every now and then to Deuce Robinson and whatnot. But for the most part, Miami's defense executed at a high level. Screens also a big part of what Florida State does. On screen attempts, FSU went 4 of 6 for 26 yards. The most effective play, honestly, for Florida State on the day was quarterback scramble. Castellano scrambled 9 times for 66 yards and picked up 5 first downs that way. A lot of those scrambles were in the fourth quarter, garbage time scrambles, but that was the most effective way that Florida State moved the ball, scrambling and or scramble drill passing situations in the fourth quarter. Just some quick hitter points. Again, line of scrimmage team. Miami's dominant up front on defense too. They had 42 quarterback pressures. I've never seen a number that high before against a Power 4 team. Bain had 11 pressures on the day, 0 sacks, but he affected the quarterback in a big time way. Mesidor had 8 pressures. He did get a sack. He was excellent on the day as well. Good to see backups or rotational players also making an impact. Marquise Lightfoot had 6 pressures. Armando Blunt had 5 pressures. So Miami's defensive line totally whipped FSU's offensive line all game long. Another thing that stood out too on the rewatch, Miami safety play, high level. Zechariah Poyser and Jacoby Thomas are thumpers on the back end, tackled really well in space. FSU puts a lot of pressure on your safeties to take good angles and tackle well. Poyser was flying around. He was very impressive with the way he was tackling and playing in space. Jacoby Thomas, of course, showed up in coverage as well with interceptions and PBUs. Both an excellent performance by both players. And to me, it reminded me this is like the first time I felt like, man, Miami's got some real thumpers, like guys who knock you back at safety for the first time, in my opinion, since Jamal Carter and Rayshawn Jenkins were back there. I think in 2016, if I remember right, when they were having their best season in those roles. So, and I'll say this too, like to me, like Poyser is probably the most improved player on the defense since game one. Game one, there was a little tentativeness. There was, against Florida State, he was playing very fast. And so that trajectory is encouraging. Let's see if he can continue it. Thomas with an all-time, I don't think this is hyperbole. An all-time type of performance against Florida State at the safety spot with the way he impacted the game in so many ways. So defensively, that's kind of all my notes. I stopped watching at 28-3, honestly, on the rewatch because it was a wrap at that point. Yes, FSU made the game close on the scoreboard, but Miami was never really threatened in that game as that was happening. And look, like the state of the FSU program is in a bad place when FSU media is having the discussion about moral victories in a rivalry game in year 6 of a coaching tenure because of fourth quarter garbage time points. This game was never close. It was over at 28-3. Miami was never really threatened in a significant way. Um, F, you know, in that fourth quarter, Miami forced again FSU to dink and dunk or Thomas Castellano scramble drills, and that just caused FSU to chew the clock, finish out the game. Through 3 quarters, Miami's yards per play was 7.3 yards per play. FSU's was 4.5. Stat nerds will tell you that that 3 yards per play difference is significant. It's total domination when that happens. FSU gained 47% of its yards in the game in the fourth quarter, which again, garbage time wasn't real. There was 180 plays, including special teams and all that. 180 plays in that game. From about play 67 on, the win expectancy for Miami never dipped below 85%. And for more than half of the game, it was above 90%. So Miami controlled the whole game. Miami controlled the game after 28-3. And also there was coming into the game, there's just this BS narrative of, is Mario Cristobal going to Mario Cristobal this thing at the end of the game if FSU makes it close? Look, I can be accused of being an apologist with this, but I think it's also fair. You can question the execution of Miami in the fourth quarter, but the decisions of whether to run or pass or go for it on fourth down by Miami staff were on point. The execution was not on point, and that's why really Miami's offense couldn't get first downs and salt the game away. That's why Florida State scored points to make it look closer than it actually was. Um, I'll say this too, like when Miami took that 28-3 lead, Mario Cristobal went for it twice on fourth down. He converted both. One of those fourth downs was a explosive touchdown by Malachi Toney, in which Miami was in plus territory. That was a kill shot. The other one was as we referenced earlier, 4th and 1 on the FSU 10-yard line. If Mario Cristobal is the coach that everyone pretends he is, he kicks the field goal there and ties the game 3-3. He went for it. They got it. They scored a touchdown 7-3. It was over at that point. And look, I get it. Like narratives are what make sports fun, so I get it. But the Mario Cristobal, terrible game manager thing hasn't honestly been a thing going back to last season. He was embarrassed by the not kneel thing at Georgia Tech, and that deserves a ton of criticism and, make fun of that because it deserves that. But since that point, he really made it a point to change his ways, learn more about analytics, learn more about how to manage a game in that offseason. And since 2024, he has, I don't know, like if he's necessarily made a bad decision analytically. But I get it. Like he has been hit with the narrative and, to some extent, you know, he's always going to be that guy until he wins a national championship, if he wins a national championship. But if you're actually like watching these games, that narrative lately is silly and outdated. And since last season, Mario Cristobal has been, frankly, a better game manager than Mike Norvell. It's not even close. But again, narratives are fun and funny. I get it. My final thoughts, look, I think this Miami team is just hard to beat. Like where is the weakness on this team? They can play any style, any way a team wants to try and play them. Miami can play that way. And to this point, every team Miami's played against has had their worst outing of the year against Miami. To me, this offense is like top 20 in the country good. I think the defense is like top 10 in the country good, which is a remarkable jump year over year because last year's defense was probably in the 50s or 60s, depending on which ranking you look at defensively. And look, again, Miami destroyed some interesting narratives that were popping up going into last week's game, like, oh, how will Carson Beck play on the road? How will this team handle the road environment of Doak? Does Carson Beck have zip on the ball? Miami hasn't played anyone. Florida just beat Texas. USF continues to look impressive as a G5 team. Notre Dame continues to roll. And again, would Mario Cristobal screw this game up if it was a close game? This game was never close. It was never going to be close. Miami had a bye week to prepare for its biggest rival with a significant talent advantage. FSU was coming off a loss to Virginia. Um, when Miami got off the bus at Doak Campbell Stadium, they won the game. Uh, this was on paper a top 20 matchup, but it was never going to be close. And I wish this game was more real because this is a great rivalry, but it's just not there yet. FSU's roster is not there yet. Um, Overall, like honestly, this game felt like more of a blowout on the rewatch than it did live. And I'd like to get out of here just with FSU program thoughts in general, uh, because this rivalry does matter, and from a Miami perspective, where Florida State is matters. But look, again, we said this last year. Honestly, like this team is better. This Florida State team is better, but this Florida State team is still nowhere close to the standard of talent that they should have. Um, it's still caught in the vicious cycle of lazy high school recruiting and no development of the high school signees and being too portal dependent. Uh, the NFL, the NFL draft tells the whole story of Mike Norvell's inability to either recruit high school talent or develop their high school talent or both. This is year 6 of Mike Norvell's tenure, and he's produced 2 NFL draft picks that he signed out of high school, and they were both this year, 2025 draft. AZ Thomas in the 3rd round, Josh Farmer in the 4th round. His 2023 team that went 13-1, they produced 10 NFL draft picks, but none of them were high school signees. Uh, Mike Norvell doesn't recruit well, doesn't develop high school talent that they do sign. 2 high school signees, and as NFL draft picks in year 6 is unacceptable. You also look at the portal churn that they undergo. Like, yes, the portal is important. You should always acquire talent in the portal, but is it a net positive or is it a net negative compared to what you're also losing in the portal? And look, I would still say FSU is probably a net positive year over year in the portal, but they also have guys that left in the portal this offseason that are starting games for better teams and performing decently and could be guys that are contributing to Florida State, in my opinion. Defensive end Pat Payton is starting for LSU. Defensive end Marvin Jones Jr. is starting for one of the better defenses in the country at Oklahoma. Wide receiver Malik Benson goes to one of the best teams in the country in Oregon and is second on that team in receiving with 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tomiwa Duruje is starting games at Illinois. Starting games at Illinois and has 9 pressures and 1 sack. TJ Ferguson is an offensive lineman at Syracuse and has allowed 3 pressures and 0 sacks. Last year at FSU, he allowed 18 pressures and 3 sacks. So what's going on with the coaching and development there? But TJ Ferguson is a talented guy. Julian Armella started 3 games at right guard this season at UCLA. Omarion Hampton is a starter at Memphis. He's a corner. He's playing well. Byron Turner, Tulsa, has 6 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 12 pressures. Could help them, in my opinion, as a rotational guy. Sean Murphy's a linebacker. Started games for South Carolina this season. Now, are these guys like game changers? No, but to me, it's not a good sign for your program's stability and ability to develop and get the most out of their talent. Um, Again, this whole thing kind of boils down to players over plays. Are you a serious talent acquisition program? The FSU program, to me, has a Power Four budget. They have resources to spend, but they operate like a G5 program. G5 staff recruiting effort because they think they can overcome talent deficiency with scheme and coaching. In general, now this year, they're running G5 schemes that are hard to recruit elite talent to. Gus Malzahn, you're going to struggle landing wide receivers and quarterbacks. 3-3-5 type of defense, you're going to struggle landing talented defensive linemen. Uh, I think, because they are caught up in this portal churn, because they don't recruit high school players well, they overpay for transfers that frankly have no business playing a significant role at a place like FSU to go there. It's just a vicious cycle. And again, I wrote about this back in 2023. FSU media got all up in arms, but leading up to the Zaquan Patterson commitment, I highlighted what Miami's recruiting pitch was to Zaquan Patterson. Basically, they showed Zaquan the data, the facts of, hey, FSU doesn't really play the guys they recruit, and the guys they do play, they eventually kick to the curb and make them transfer out. And for the most part, that's been the case. This year, FSU is starting to play some of their freshmen. But to me, are they game-changing freshmen even? We'll see in a few years, I guess. But and now, like, look, FSU absolutely exploited an inefficiency with the portal back in that 2023 season. They landed some absolute studs that way. But since then, portal acquisition reflects and mirrors high school acquisition, talent acquisition. And so now all the programs hammer the portal as much as they do high school recruiting. And look, that 2023 season coming off that, right? FSU signed the 12th best class in the country. Miami signed the 4th best class. This was the first sign that FSU wasn't about that life, talent acquisition. And look at Miami's playmakers this year. It's homegrown high school talent. Malachi Tony is a true freshman. Offensive line, the entire offensive line's homegrown. They played Francis Maui-Noa as a freshman. Ruben Bain has been playing since he was a true freshman. He's now one of the best defensive linemen in the country. Wesley Basaint has progressed every year. He played a bunch as a true freshman. OJ Frederic, their corner, Miami's best corner. He was a true freshman All-American last year. Bryce Fitzgerald this year is making plays as a true freshman safety. SJ Alafatuli was a highly touted offensive lineman that they are finding a role for as a fullback. If you're good, you're a big time player, and you're a freshman at Miami, they're going to find a role for you to get on the field and develop you. And yes, Miami does also go to the portal to supplement the roster. Miami recruits at an elite level. Florida State does not. They have been unserious about recruiting, starting with their first year zero excuses because they had to start during the COVID year. To me, like, at the end of the day, recruiting's a grind no matter what. And if you want to make excuses about your lack of recruiting success, then you're never going to be a good recruiter. So to me, FSU's kind of at an inflection point. Since Jimbo left, which is now 8 years ago, FSU is 47-43 overall with a 27-31 ACC record. 5 of those seasons have been losing seasons, with one of those seasons being an all-time 2-10 bad year. On the flip side, they did have that 13-1 year. Mike Norvell in his last 10 ACC games is 1-9. This FSU regime doesn't scare Miami fans or the UM staff. The longer they are there, the better it is for Mario Cristobal and this regime. So let's say that. But if FSU convinces itself this year that going 7-5 or 8-4 is good enough for another year of Mike Norvell because it's a 5 or 6 win improvement year over year in year 6, that tells you just how FSU's not serious about being good about football right now. To me, FSU's kind of in a bit of a mess. Miami was a mess when Jimbo Fisher was doing his thing at Florida State. This kind of reminds me of that time, but the roles are being flipped with Mario Cristobal at Miami kind of dominating talent acquisition. And, the results are showing on the field. The rest of the season is going to be interesting for Florida State because, I don't think their defense is particularly good, and which means you're susceptible to losing any game when you don't have a good defense. Their offense, I think, has a lot of explosive potential, but Miami kind of showed the blueprint to everyone they're playing on how you can frustrate this FSU offense. Now, teams don't have the personnel Miami does, and that's a big deal. But this is how you defend this FSU attack. And FSU is probably going to be in a 7 or 8 win team. Vegas gets it right again with the over under at 7.5. But should that be tolerated in year 6 of the Mike Norvell era? Anyways, that's my thoughts from the FSU game. That's my thoughts on FSU in general. Hope you guys enjoyed this quick hitter podcast. And until next time, take care.